no one. No one comes back to open the door. No one. A strange sensation. But my guess is that that's how life often lacks animation. Somewhat numb, a little bit past tense. Yesterday life. Not that I would, at least not previously in life, but perhaps lately after all. I mean, I agree, maybe not. Well, you know, I need to appreciate the small things. Life's small things. But whose small things? And who is to determine when what a small thing in life is? Are things that are for free smaller than things that has a price? Luxury goods, after all, they are often quite small, except maybe for yachts and mansions. But they are a little bit useful, so they don't really count as luxury. Interesting to observe how luxury goods almost exclusively maintain a very strong position on secondary markets. One would think it would be more to acquire something at the very moment when you have it in your hand, that its value decreases in a flash. Fireworks. You invest hugely in fireworks and 30 seconds later it's all gone. In comparison to a diamond necklace that, including index regulations, will maintain its value for generations and generations. An exclusive apartment with a balcony, at least one. Or a luxury condo. You know, one that the real estate agent have convinced you will double its value within a couple of days. Interesting. In fact, fireworks. But luxury doesn't really go well together with spectacle. Luxury needs to be practiced with a certain kind of indifference. Some kind of je ne sais quoi. Things for free often seem to attract less attention. And is that what makes them small? But somewhere it appears to somehow flip. After all, a gift is for free, but can possess a lot of value, different kinds. For the one passing the gift on, it can be connected with strong efforts and maybe even sacrifice. But that value, those efforts at the moment of passing the gift on cannot be part of the equation, must be left behind. A gift cannot be associated with any desire for gratification, symbolic or otherwise. Equally for the one that receives the gift. It cannot arrive with a, how did you know? I've always wished for exactly that. Or you shouldn't have, that's way too much. No, the gift must come with a certain kind of why. And it is first when practiced, when the receiver and the gift establish a relationship, that its true value unfolds. Children is maybe the best and the worst example. I mean, they are, after all, for free, and the production value is quite minimal. At the same time, they are the biggest gift life can offer, and they don't exactly come with a return policy. Strangely, it also doesn't seem to matter how many, as in, like, practice doesn't wear out the uniqueness of either of them. Does small or big things have something to do with durability? The wrist watch that the son inherits from his father, when his turn inherits it from yet another generation. The little thing obtained through choices against life's excesses, signifying commitment and loyalty. I stood by. We held the fortress. Durability. And at the same time, that small thing holds and presents life's lack of permanence. An inherited watch is a small big thing and the big small thing, but never a middle-sized thing. At some point, quite comme il faut. But today, who keeps a job for several decades? I mean, or have we perhaps forgotten something about how to commit, how to practice loyalty? Or has somehow society transformed into a milieu that has made commitment an endangered species? Perhaps it's simply like that capitalism has become so greedy it can't even offer its freaking flyer members a little gift at the end of. She gave me a kiss. A kiss can be a really tiny thing, but a certain one can change a life, or two, or many. And after that first one, we couldn't, maybe, or they couldn't stop. And still that first one pays the bills for all the following ones. All those kisses. But then one day they started to fade. We stopped. They stopped. Perhaps we got bored, perhaps we became self-conscious about the possibility of an oddly flavored breath. And we started to sleep back to back. But what happens with that kiss that wears out? Does it end up in a malignant inflation, or does the rare kiss still exchanged increase exponentially in value and become something really big? We remember the first kiss, maybe many first kisses. The one behind that surprising one. Really didn't see that coming. And that one that I had waited for. Longed for for so long. Some maybe an inch disappointing, or maybe mostly because of too big expectations due to a little bit of excessive fantasizing. And then that one. That one that changed everything. I wonder if I will remember the last one. And I wish the distance and the journey between my last kiss and my last breath will not be long enough to get lost. That the time between the last kiss and that final breath will not exceed the limits of remembrance. We say she outlived her husband with 20 years. But do we at the same time say she endured life for 20 years? Without the luxury, without the privilege and joy of giving somebody a kiss, or for that matter, receiving one. God welcomes all of us. His house appreciates us all, sinners, liars, and criminals included. On the door, there's a big sign saying "Tout est gratuit." There's no entrance fee. To God's nearness. But then we are supposed to cultivate our relationship with God and with our faith. But isn't it strange, isn't it peculiar that at the same time as we appreciate that God's house is open to us all and for free, that we find ourselves upset and annoyed in moments when he or she or they don't appreciate our prayers. when we don't feel heard or seen. It is common knowledge that we can't expect a return on for free or payback or remuneration. No. We are very aware that there is no interest rate on free. And everybody knows that a Luna Park with a fat entrance fee, I mean, the Ferris wheel will be bigger than the haunted house. And the haunted house more cinematic and high-tech. But when it comes to the exchange with God, it seems that we have missed out, forgotten about that slight predicament. And does that make one's relation to God and faith a small thing? A small relation with a big thing. I guess we all was informed that God, the creator of it all, is a huge thing. That sounds logical. But maybe it would be better if it was the other way around. A big relation with a small thing, and that it is through the practice of the relation, the devotion to the relation, the commitment that holds and maintains, that suspends the small thing. On the other hand, if God is in all of us and all of us is in God, and God is also the creator of everything, it would appear somewhat peculiar if he or she or they would charge themselves an entrance fee. Wouldn't it now? But I can wait. I can wait. She asked me to hold her hand. It must have been towards the end of May. As a request, a small thing. But for who? For the one being asked, it might mean next to nothing. Oh, sure you can, why not? Be my guest, let's try. But for the one asking, it might be associated with big efforts. I mean, to overcome shyness and facing the possibility of being rejected, and yet obviously the response can at times change lives, the course of two lives. A child who slips its hand into mine. almost instinctively innocent, a small thing. And yet, each and every time, something so big, small request. And simultaneously a big gift. Something that I have to engage with without any reflections in regard to responsibility or morals. I can wait. I can wait. At the end of the fence, I can wait. No responsibility nor morals can wait. They're really bad at waiting. Perhaps they are the exact opposite. But I can wait. I can wait. At the end of the fence, is waiting a small thing. For the bus, it's usually not very long, but it can be experienced as a very big thing. For love, one can wait forever, but such waiting must not be a big thing, must not be understood as an effort, especially not a big effort. I mean, if it's love, and that is not an effort. If it's experienced or felt like an effort, then maybe it's not anything else than a bus being really delayed. But when that waiting, that must not be an effort, but a little bit whatever, and done with ease, comes to an end. Does it mean does it change size from big to small? And then it's like, that was that, and now we move on. The person being waited for, coming home from the war, or perhaps a residency in Switzerland. I mean, you have been waiting for me. As if waiting was an effort or a form of test of endurance turned into something competitive. But then if this is slightly later in life and this is the third time you wait for somebody, does that make it a triathlon? Oh, 2.5 years, really? That's not a lot. Does perhaps anticipation play a role here? And then there he or she is. What happens for the time of waiting then? Until the return, I have counted the days, the hours, even minutes. I have, with closed eyes, lain sleepless. Wondering longing, hoping that I have not that I haven't lost you, worrying and fantasizing about the moment when we will reunite. But what is that time? What are those feelings and emotions now when they must be nothing now when you are back? They can have no value. And yet all I had when you were away was the waiting and the anticipation of your return. Waiting was what kept me alive. Waiting resonates of passivity. Waiting, by definition, maybe not definition, but like a little bit definition. Waiting is the opposite of suspense. Suspense is when postponed time is undulating, crisscrossed by creeks and rivers and pathways. When time is bumpy and interlaced with when time is like dried earth after an extensive drought. That suspense. Waiting has none of these elaborations, no gaps to overcome, no intervals to skip over. It's not that waiting is out of focus. No. It's all dials are meticulously calibrated and technologies are razor sharp. There are just no details. Nothing that occupies. Perhaps that's why people tend to have a cigarette when they are waiting for the bus. It's a means to reinstall details. No, actually, the cigarette or the activity rather is in fact a form of disavowal. Smoking the verb, smoking as a means to substitute the lack of details with manufactured ones, even though knowing that that's the very function of the cigarette. But is a detail an obstacle or an asset? Is something with a lot of details bigger, or are details what actually makes something small? That's a detail we really don't need. But then, are any details necessary? Or do the details in fact ensure that possibilities are still at hand? Details is a means to postpone permanence. There's definitely a difference in between voluntary and involuntary waiting. Think about one of those days when you are maybe not at your very, very best, and the person that has been waiting says in a soothing and calm voice, "After all the time that I was waiting, how could you?" How do you respond to something such? Maybe that's when you need a cigarette, however, you're not waiting for a bus. Maybe it's not the moment when you ping-pong the comment back with a light-hearted, "Well, I didn't exactly ask you, did I now?" I don't know, but perhaps involuntary waiting is the same as grief. Or maybe grief is that specific form of involuntary waiting when you can't stop waiting, although you know that the waiting will never come to an end. Grief is waiting without destination. Grief is life in which details are veiled, sensed, but as if through a veil, through a haze, sensed but through a haze, or like as if you wear really thick winter gloves. Ghost details, perhaps. For every moment lived, an amount of future is subtracted. Young people have, I don't know if they possess it really, but young people have more future. To grow old, to come in terms with age implies to implies to find oneself available for the fact that one's futures are not, that one's futures one day will, it's kind of beautiful to think about the gentle realization that oops, right now my stack of futures has come to an end. Today I have arrived to the last page of my futures, and it's time for me to bid you all farewell. I'll stay put here, and you guys, you move on. Move on to your futures to come. But then what happens to all the unlived futures? The futures of those who died prematurely. Maybe what we call ghosts are all the unlived futures of all those that weren't allowed to see their stack of futures come to an end. They didn't find the strength to turn the last page. There is one thing though, that we can't be allowed. Even when asked really kindly. Something to which we cannot gain permission, although asking kindly. And that is to ask to be allowed to skip over a chunk of the futures that we have been assigned. Even though, however kindly we asked, however kindly I asked, and however many times, however many times I asked, however kindly, to impatience, I guess, precedes the moment when coming to terms with the fact, with the inevitability that one's futures aren't infinite. That moment on the phone when with who knows who. But so when are you coming back? It's I'll be there in it's only going to be 2 days. And the person on the other side, on the other end of the line, responds. Curious. Are there lines nowadays when there's no cables that connects us when we are on the phone? And in waiting, did the depth, qualities, or so on, of waiting change when the cables became obsolete? Are these lines, these wires, do they still resonate of waiting and longing? It's not long now. I'll be there in 2 days. And the person on the other side of on the other end responds, I can't wait. I really can't wait. What an awkward thing to say. Although of course it feels good. And in certain ways you ought to. You ought to. Even though everybody knows that of course you can wait. Obviously. You won't die or disintegrate. And if you did, the waiting would be in vain in the first place. So, still, well actually, it will and cannot not be a delight to wait. Because, how could it? When you're waiting for such an extraordinary something or someone. Still, if you don't wait, it's like you don't care, that you are indifferent. An intricate twist. Moments when waiting grows and grows, that's so big that we lose sense of scale. Moments when you wait, maybe for the outcome of a job interview, or the results from a series of clinical or medical tests. Moments when waiting becomes so painful that even if the results are negative, it's a strong relief. Or when you're waiting for a crush to show up at a date, in a second, waiting transformed into awkward silences and forced conversation. It's nothing personal. But I prefer if you are if you were a little bit more late. Because as long as you didn't arrive, you and I, we were still perfect. It's not going to be long now. I'll be there in 2 days. But I want 2 days to be long, really, really long. Because every moment when I'm waiting for you, I sense this gentle glow. I become brand new and feel like freshly brushed teeth the whole day long. It's when I don't know when you'll arrive that I suffer. And sometimes I remain in that state. It's a form of self-inflicted. Whispering masochism was perhaps not really the word that I was looking for, but you know, the peculiar enjoyment of deliberately subjecting oneself to doubt. In our West, in many and prominent, for good or bad, Christian cultures, grief is something carried by the individual. We go through life together, whatever the weather and so on, but when it comes to grief, you're on your own. I'm certainly not an expert, but isn't it a little bit unfair, or say, a bit unfair and somehow even stingy that at the very end of life, as the last thing we do, we're obliged to appear in court and to be evaluated and judged by God. One would think that a generous God would forgive and forget. Not forgive, just forget. Like forget in a sort of a cheeky, under the eye kind of way. I know that you know that I know, but I will still deny it, because to forgive, I will still forget and deny it. Because forgive is still acknowledging, still carries still recognizes that something might not have unfolded exactly as desired or up to standards. The father or parent that offers the child, maybe not a child, but a more grown-up child then perhaps, but it also doesn't particularly matter. Now, the father who offers the kid a loan, however, possessing the assets and having no intention of using them. Especially associated with an offhand comment. You have to make yourself worthy, you know. And at the end of life, in particular, at the end of life, as the very last thing, up there in front of, you have to make yourself worthy. How is that one says? You learn from your mistakes. What an unusually bad morals or sad morals. But then on the other hand, maybe Maybe it's equally shitty. You learn from the things you forgive. First, I need you to acknowledge that you did me wrong. Then, perhaps I can. Or, I forgive you, but only when I have seen you suffer the consequences of your actions. To forgive is still an engagement in dominance and power. People that are proud of their own ability to forgive, that swim, that plunge oceanically into the self-righteous appearance of forgiveness. Rectification, what an unusually horrible and proprietary attitude. Forgiveness, in fact, must and cannot be something private. It requires, it is not something that you give in the sense of pass me the salt, or receive, as in whatever that could be, an email. To forgive implies to step down, to withdraw from privacy in favor of a form of zooming out and becoming public. And there, to forgive requires a form of comments. Forgiveness, maybe until 1776, but after that, forgiveness has been on the Trans-Siberian capitalism. And you know what? Already, before it found its correct coach, it swapped forgive for transaction. Forgive became transaction. That terrifying moment when forgiveness speaks. And by the way, what's in it for me? As if forgiveness would be is a good deal, but I need closure. It's another, at least for me, it's another of those American things. What a sad story. Who came up with that? What a one-dimensional therapist must that have been. I need closure before I can forgive. Why would one rely so much on reason? I need to understand, to be able to follow causally step by step. And then maybe an unbelievably regulatory approach to loss, grief and trauma. Can there be no other alternatives than putting something behind us, than making something come to an end? Packaging it up. And storing it in perhaps Things doesn't have to move on a path. But that there can be a form of cohabitation, a landscape in which things doesn't need to occupy, doesn't need to stand on each other's feet, but can coexist alongside. Forgetting isn't easy, you know, because it cannot be done actively. It needs to be practiced with a form of indetermination. And in ways it's much more complex than forgiving, especially for Americans, because there's no, or for us all nowadays, because it doesn't involve a transaction. Nothing is exchanged. Forgiving is to bring something to an end. Forgetting, on the other hand, is to engage with the movement, a form of dispersion, a concentric movement through which items and elements, things and peculiarities move apart until a moment when semiotic coherence is lost. On the other hand, maybe forgetting is another word for passive-aggressive, and an active forgetting is synonymous to repression. But forgetting has to be done in two steps. First you have to forget, then you have to forget to forget. So it's first in the second step when you without determination forget what you have forgotten. That's when I have freed myself from forms of exchange of guilt. Once I told a friend, or maybe it was more of an acquaintance, I told her this story. I don't remember the context, but it was or when or where, but it was definitely at a party, although not particularly late, so it wasn't in that sense of I told her this story, or I told her a story about a guy who had a child in the same kindergarten as me. But already before I was halfway through the story, the acquaintance interrupted me with a way too loud voice. Yeah, of course, he just wanted attention. I was a little bit taken back. And then she made clear that the guy, she might even have called him the dude. The guy, as well as me, were total losers. Me for having bothered her with such a mediocre anecdote. I mean, I didn't say anything more, but not because I didn't want to, but because she had already started to talk with somebody else and apparently about something much more interesting, although to me it sounded like the exact opposite. The guy who had a child in the same kindergarten as me, in any case, identifiable as a cultural entrepreneur, I would say, not as an artist, neither as a manager, but you know the type. He, in any case, the guy who had a child in the same kindergarten as me, once in a while he showed up. He showed up in a fluorescent jacket. One of these that city cleaners and garbage handlers are obliged to wear, like too orange or some other unidentifiable color, if color is even something that one can. And of course, the first association is attention. How could it be otherwise? Hello, here I am the guy with the fluorescent jacket, etc., etc. But through fragments of exchange, through that never actually never became any kind of proper conversation, he sort of informed me, or maybe better, he let me understand that for him, actually the moment when he put on the jacket, at that very moment, he became invisible. From that moment on, everything that mattered was the jacket. And he, although the jacket was perfect size, even though he completely vanished. So for him, the jacket offered a form of anonymity. In the jacket, he became anonymous. And without the perhaps negative, dark sides of anonymity, of becoming permanently invisible and facing regulations. After all, he could still pick up his child at the kindergarten, but not really as a person. More like a human without content. A human, whichever one. As just human. Certainly something that we can understand as a privilege, but for him there was he definitely acknowledged it, but there was something very, I wonder, to be anonymous, is that a small or a big thing? Isn't it conventional understanding that anonymity is subtractive, so to say. Something is erased or retracted or taken away. From a Freudian perspective, one could think that anonymity is a form of lack, but perhaps it's all, when mentioning Marx, or mentioning Freud, then maybe Marx as well. Maybe it's all Marx's fault, actually, because, at home, off hours, when spending time in nature, you're a person and you have agency vis-a-vis your personality, whereas in the factory or at the workplace, you're alienated and you're no longer a person, but just one of endless, interchangeable, anonymous workers. Nature, however, I thought, the point of spending time in nature has to do with the fact that nature is indifferent to me. That nature doesn't of course nature acknowledges that there are a certain surface upon which the weight of my body is. It acknowledges that someone leans against a tree, that under someone's foot a fallen down branch breaks, but that someone is watching the dancing of the leaves. But nature is indifferent to me. It doesn't confirm me and my personality to the same extent as I'm not obliged to confirm it. So to spend time in nature is maybe a moment of permission to withdraw from oneself burdened and trapped in being a person. On the other hand, maybe it's also possible to regard anonymity as to be the stage just before possibility. I mean, in the sense of being identified as possibly this or possibly that. Anonymity then is a moment of living all possibilities and impossibilities at the same time. All the time, at every moment. Anonymity is like the calm before the storm. The moment just before something picks up speed. It's neither implosion or explosion. It is without prefix, it's just plosion. When something becomes possible, possibly this or possibly that, necessity is crossed out. Possibility is not necessary. It's exactly possibly this or possibly something else. Anonymity, however weird it might sound, implies to be or to become necessary. But not necessarily this or necessarily that. Simply and just necessary. I can wait. I really can. Wait. At the end of the fence, I can wait. Possibility, possibly this or possibly that. Because possibility doesn't end, it goes on and on, perpetuates. Therefore, possibility cannot not be the opposite of being real. Possibility is the withdrawal or absence of being genuine. To become anonymous equals to become real. And maybe that's why we, at least I, fear city cleaners and garbage handlers to an extent. Because anonymity neither communicates possibility or asks for a choice, makes no propositions, and therefore makes me experience my own possible disappearance, my own possible erasure, my anonymity. But anonymity is not a form of erasure. On the contrary, anonymity is becoming full. It means to become completed, completely full, and fully completed. And without having to take any or whatsoever decision. Especially not any choices in relation to anything or anybody else. But I wonder, is possibility smaller than anonymity? Some say one doesn't choose love, but it's the other way around, that love chooses us. Maybe since I didn't make the choice, didn't decide for this or that possibility. So love isn't a matter of possibility, and because it was chosen for me, it is for me necessary. Cannot not be necessary. To love is simultaneously the fear and the bliss of becoming anonymous. The fear because of the withdrawal of possibility, the opportunity of a choice, and the bliss of becoming one. Becoming at ease with the here and the now, of being in place. Love has no reasons, only necessity. So when I say, I love you, I'm given a moment, maybe even a short one, but just a short one, but still, I'm given an interval vis-à-vis possibility. It's pretty remarkable, isn't it? That love, that to love, possibly one of the most personal things that we humans do, at the same time has nothing to do with us, is something that doesn't and cannot belong to us. To love implies to give oneself up a little, to denounce one's personhood. The I, that one that loves you, is simultaneously me and not me at the same time. Fully me and simultaneously at the same time, all the time, not me. And I love you. If I had reason to love you, if there was a rationale or justification, wouldn't that be a little bit melancholic and disappointing? I love you as long as you don't color your hair green, or as long as you don't bring your pet turtle over, or at least as long, please, avoid garlic. No, love reflects itself and only itself. I love you because I love you. Love is because, and as long as I do, because. Love is necessary and perhaps even objective. And if love is not my choice and can't be, love can also not be private. To love implies to make oneself available in public. Does something become more true if expressed with a loud voice? My father used to say, especially in the car, let's speak lowercase. No screaming, just tiny, tiny letters. Or does a truth gain prominence if announced through a whisper? A secret certainly becomes more secret if whispered in somebody's ear. If something is true, it must be true independently of volume. So why holler when a whisper is more than enough? A truth is necessary and has nothing to do with possibility. And the truth does not belong to anybody. It's not even ours, but independent of us humans and our lives, big or small. But its truth is necessary. A necessity is the obverse, the other side of possibility. And if love is not something that I choose, it cannot be possible, but ends up being necessary. And if truth is necessary, and love is necessary, does that perhaps make the end of the day love true? But I can wait. I can wait. There at the end of the fence. When active, when doing things, time or duration become relative to the activity. time engages and becomes about something and not itself. Activity is time's forgetting itself, occupied by details, engaged with transit and exchange. Time in action sooner or later arrives at interpretation, in other words, at possibility. Consequently, however, doesn't that mean that waiting is similar to the experience of time itself? Waiting is time turned on itself, time transformed into self-referentiality. And I'm wondering, is that time becoming objective? Waiting is thus the experience of objective time. But maybe the opposite is also true, that waiting is when time becomes fully subjective. It's only experience, phenomenological time, pure subjectivity, since it doesn't stand in relation to anything else. The cigarette then offers waiting a relation, and therefore the waiting is easily overcome. Whereas if waiting, on the other hand, is objective, no need for the cigarette is not required, because waiting turns into a stretch of contemplation, anxious anticipation, therefore being exchanged for indifference, or forms of letting go. In other words, if waiting is objective, it is also becoming anonymous. I can wait. I can wait. And no one can show me the way. There's no doorman. And no one comes back to open. But maybe it is already open. There at the end of the fence. It's just that we've grown so accustomed to there being doors that we have forgotten that openness is something altogether different than being open. After all, openness, like forgiveness, is overlooked. It's looked after. It's looked after. And that to be open means to share dressing room with forgetting. When we hold hands, even just casually on the street, does it necessarily have to signify belonging and communicate confirmation, through which together as strong, you and me? But perhaps holding someone's hand can equally function or even exist as a means to stand together, however little we have in common. Even though I don't know your name, and maybe especially because I don't, we can hold hands open. without forming bonds, remaining anonymous and yet stand together. To unite not because we belong, but because of committing to necessity. To hold hands, to offer oneself, or to ask for one's hand to be held implies to give oneself up a little. To surrender and depart from transaction. And there's no details. No details that bring us together or keep us apart. And there, things are what they are. There at the end of the fence. Which, however, is far from anything neutral. Perhaps even. It's one of those moments that cannot be forced, and yet, exactly because it can't, it's necessary.